Guys, RegenAG Nation here. Week 7 of scouting in the cornfields. Let me take you in here and I want to show you a few things. This corn is moving into the tasseling and pollination stage, and I get really excited about this. It's just a super cool process, and I kind of want to show you how that works a little bit. And so here we go. As you can see, that little ear of corn is forming there. And this part here is what they call silks. And each silk, each individual strand, is connected to a kernel inside of this ear of corn. And maybe in a minute I'll break one apart and kind of show you how that works. But so what happens here is, you can see up here, let me pull this away, you've got your tassel up there. And these tassels, they have these basically little, they look like a grain, basically. They're little sacs of pollen, and the sacs of pollen, they basically, the outside falls off and the pollen falls down, and you can see, like I can shake it here, if you can see that pollen, and it falls down, attaches to the attaches to the silk, and then once the silk is pollinated, that's when the actual kernel formation happens. Let me try to pull this off here and I'll show you what we got. So I kind of described the process a little bit, but I want to actually show you what's happening here. So I peeled this back and you can see all the silks, and every silk, as you can see, is attached to an individual kernel. And then what happens is I pulled the tassel down here, and these little basically pollen sacs are on there, and they bust open, and you get the pollen, and it basically shakes onto the silk, and the pollen pollinates that silk and the kernel, and then that's when you actually have the kernel formation inside of the ear. If the silk does not get pollinated, you will not have a kernel. So you say you go out in your garden or anywhere on your farm or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, what are those spots on the corn where it doesn't have any kernel? That means that that silk did not pollinate. So it cannot form a kernel without it being pollinated. Let's get back into it. We got really warm temperatures out here, guys. So keep the water on your corn. The biggest thing you're gonna deal with is you're gonna have heat stress, which can reduce your yield because it can consume the energy from the corn plant. And the corn plant is allocating energy to keep itself alive from the heat instead of pushing it towards that fruit. And so we need adequate energy along with low stress conditions in order to produce a really good fruit. So keep that in mind. Also, your heat stress is going to bring in your mites, and that's something you should be paying attention to as well in your cornfields. Start by scouting in those lower leaves and working your way up. Mites typically always start in the lower leaves on corn and then work their way up. You start having them work their way up clear to that ear of corn, that's when you're going to see your yield damage and stuff like that. So if you can keep those numbers low, and I'll tell it to you again, I believe I said this in the last video, but high nitrogen numbers, high ammonium, high nitrate in your corn plant is a huge attraction for mites. So if you can get good conversion in your plants with molybdenum, plenty of energy for conversion and stuff like that in your plant, you're going to reduce those levels, and it's going to reduce your likelihood of having mite infestations in your field. So let's keep that in mind, guys. And that's what I got for you this week. And thank you for joining me. And remember, make farming fun again.